Welcome to the Scrutiny meeting on the 3rd of February. Start time 5:30.
Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We are not expecting a fire alarm, so if it goes off, please leave via the Pease Hill entrance. I'd like to welcome members of the committee, other members of the council and officers present. Also to members of the public here in the chamber or watching the council's YouTube channel. I'm going to ask people to introduce themselves when they ask their first question. We'll now move on to apologies for absence. I haven't received any apologies in advance of this meeting. Are there any now? I think we have a couple of people who are on their way.
He was on her way.
Yeah. Declarations of interest is the second item. Does any member of the committee have a declaration of interest to make? No. So we'll move on. Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes. The minutes from the meetings on the 7th of October and 2nd of December 2025 have been submitted to this meeting for approval. Are there any concerns? If you have any, please raise them now. Okay, so I'll take them as approved as a correct record. Thank you. Right, public questions is item number 4. We have one public question submitted for tonight's meeting from Susie Williams, which has been published on the meeting's webpage. Susie is joining us online. Welcome, Susie. Councillor Moore, Cabinet Member for Climate Action and Environment, will be responding to your question. And Councillor Moore, thank you very much for coming. Is she online as well? Susie's just joined us.
Hi.
We have Councillor Moore.
Hello. Good evening.
All right, since we are missing Councillor Moore, Susie, can you hang on a minute? We'll go on to the next item and then come back to you.
Yeah, fine.
So we have the item 5, which is the next one, is the work programme. Does anyone have any comments on this? Do we want... Yeah, okay, we'll let her sit down. The work programme. Has anyone got any comments on the work programme? Okay, so I think we are okay with that. Of course, you can email me or Beth anytime if you would like to raise issues for this committee. Okay, so let's go back to item 4, public questions. So Susie, would you like to... wait, no, you're ready. We've got the question. So it's down to Councillor Moore to answer. Thank you very much for coming.
Well, sorry I'm a bit late. I just try and find it. So thank you very much for your question. I do have an answer.
I'm muted or not?
Sorry. Just want to make sure I get it right. So I can confirm that no recycling or waste collected by the Greater Cambridge Shared Waste Service is sent to the Warren Point Refuse Facility. Any contamination, such as dirty nappies, food and clothes that is separated out during the materials recycling facility, that's the MRF sorting process, that cannot be recycled, is stored at Regen's Derry Boy Road site. This is a new waste facility on the Derry Boy site, which has all the required permits to store the waste. sorry, a bit out of breath from running, which is then sent on to Sweden to be used for refuse-derived fuel, i.e. it's an energy from waste facility. Therefore, not only does none of it go to Warren Point, none of it goes to landfill either. However, your question does very helpfully highlight the value of the waste hierarchy, which has reducing waste at the very top. Whether it's in Northern Ireland or Waterbeach, local residents do not want to smell others' waste. So amongst other reasons why reducing is at the top. So reducing the waste we all create, reusing what we can, and only then recycling should be a target for all of us. Plus, of course, even more so for businesses, which is why the newly introduced Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme has been such a positive step forward by charging companies for the amount of packaging they produce. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Susie, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do, because I didn't understand that answer, I'm afraid. You said the container went to Derryboy Road to be stored there. You then said it went to Sweden as RDF. I think you said that. Well, that's what happens to the RDF bales that are at Warren Point Harbour. So why would it be separated out? I don't understand. Can you explain that again, please?
Yes, certainly. Regen have a number of different facilities. Warren Point is one of them. And so just to be very super clear, our black bin waste does not go to Northern Ireland. It goes to landfill in Waterbeach. This is just in every, maybe not every blue bin, but in the blue bin recycling, unfortunately, there's often contaminants. Some people just throw away things like dirty. Now, I'm just explaining to the committee. So some people might throw away, for example, dirty nappies. Other people might be very keen recyclers and put things in there which unfortunately can't be recycled. So we're talking about that bit of waste. It goes to the Derryboy site. It does not go to Warren Point. However, I would say, although there have been complaints, some of which I've received myself, about the Warren Point site, all of the feedback that we've had is that it's been investigated by the Environment Agency and they're in the clear. However, none of our waste goes there anyway.
I'm sorry, I know I'm not allowed another question, but you haven't told me what happens to the stuff that goes to Derryboy Road, the contaminant. You haven't told me.
Can I come back in?
Yeah.
Just very quickly, sorry if I wasn't clear, it goes to the Derryboy site and then that goes on to Sweden.
But that's the same thing. Oh, okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Susie, for coming and posing your question.
Okay.
You can always write to Councillor Moore and she can give you a written answer. But
sometimes she gives me a written answer.
But we need to move on.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moore, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. Okay. So now we're on item 6, which is the update on the climate change strategy. We are joined by Officers Lynn Miles, Director of Economy in Place, Gemma Little, Head of Economy, Energy and Climate, David Wright, Inclusive Economy and Climate Manager. David, I understand you will present the item, but first, Lynn or Gemma, would either one of you like to introduce the report?
I'm fine for David to introduce the report, thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. The report sets out, effectively it's a work in progress. As councillors are probably aware, we're developing the new climate change strategy to run from 2026 to 2031. And this will go to Cabinet in the end of March. So this report is really telling you where we are and the process we've gone through to get to that. The history is that the council has been on this journey towards net zero for many years and is one of the leading councils in the country on this. And this is the next stage to moving towards that process. Just by way of context, the City Council only contributes 0.7 of the carbon emissions of the city. So it's already fairly low, and it's significantly lower or towards the low end of other councils. Since the first climate change strategy in 2014-15, there's been a reduction in 51.9% in carbon emissions, and I'll come on to talk a little bit about how that's been achieved. But in the report, you'll see the schedule of how that reduction is taking place, and it's on a reasonably linear basis over the last 11, 12 years. And also within that, the report talks about where the emissions come from, and they rotate, but the largest emissions at the moment are from leisure centres and swimming pools, closely followed by council vehicles, the council's fleet, and then a range of other emitters, including our own corporate buildings and premises. So if I know you were, Chair, you were very keen to talk about how we've been achieved the emissions reduction. So maybe just talk through that a little bit. One of the factors that underpins all of this is that across the country, the national grid through national policies is being reduced. So our emissions have reduced. We all have a bit of a debate about to what extent we say we've reduced our emissions. We can't say that because other things have happened out with. But what they call the greening of the grid, or the decarbonisation of the grid, has significantly contributed to that. Difficult to put an absolute number on it, but it kind of is round about the sort of 45–50% of carbon emissions reduction. It comes from that factor, and you just need to see in terms of electricity bills and more information coming out about them being more of it being renewable energy. So that's a big factor, and obviously we wouldn't get anywhere near the level we have if we just relied on that. So some of the other big projects, larger projects, are including the electric waste vehicles. So through the Greater Cambridge Shared Waste Service, there's been significant work on reducing or changing over waste vehicles to two different supplies, and one HVO, so let's forget the exact, hydrogenated fat or oil, and also to electricity. And that's been a process. We started more on the first one, and it's moving, and that's an ongoing process. And I think that you'll be aware that there's been recent investment in the launch of the solar provision at the Waterbeach depot. So that's ongoing progress, and we've seen significant improvements from that, and we will see more improvements over the coming years. And just as an example, the HVO vehicles that resulted in a 90% reduction in carbon emissions. So that's been particularly significant. But there are other factors as well, and obviously trying to have on-site solar is another element to that. So that's an ongoing process, and that's a big one because the size and the scale of the waste service. As you know, it's a shared waste service, so it's across both Cambridge City, but also the South Cambridgeshire. So we do our best to estimate the split on that, but it's not an exact science. But we know roughly what vehicles are in the city. In terms of our own events service and the cultural events team, they've moved to HVO for generators on events, outdoor events, and so on. So again, that's demonstrating a significant reduction in fossil fuels. And just on that, there's an approximate reduction of 315 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. And another, a really big one that's been done, and again, it's an ongoing project, is because of the scale of it, is the leisure centres. So Parkside pools and Abbey pools introduced air source heat pumps. And it's probably worth stressing that this one particularly has been funded by external funding or supported significantly by external funding, and also was done at a time when the existing plant equipment was needing to be upgraded. So it was taking the opportunity to upgrade old and outdated plant with much more efficient and plant that was reduced, providing much less carbon emissions. So that was a £1.7 million project to introduce air source heating and also put solar PV panels on. But as I've already said, there's still significant work to be done on the leisure centres and swimming pools, and that's ongoing. But just in terms of work that's been done so far, that resulted in a saving of over 2,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So that's some of the major ones, but I think there's also, alongside that, there's also been other ongoing projects just around better housekeeping, and just trying to put a challenge on colleagues within the council to improve the way we do things and just to try to be more efficient. And also there's been an ongoing dialogue and discussion with colleagues about what are the next things, what can we be doing, and obviously with any projects, there's a time lag to getting them in. So the strategy needs to sort of continue on, and new projects are coming on stream. I don't know if you want me to pause there briefly and answer any questions or carry on.
No, I think if you could go on to, what we are looking at now.
Okay.
Going forward, yeah.
The report also talks about how we compare, and there's quite a bit in there where we've looked at how we compare with other similar councils. Certainly, we're in the top 3 or 4 across most of the range of measures. There are some areas where we slipped slightly, and actually one of them is around almost the forward-looking. So the strategy, launching a new strategy will help us significantly in that, in terms of the fact we've got plans for the future and the direction of travel. So I think we're consistently up there, and just as some of the things anyway, but sometimes it's useful just to reflect on if you step back from it. Remember that Cambridge is one of the, well, not one of the, Cambridge is by far the leading active travel centre of the UK. 10 times the amount of cycling of the average cities across the UK, and significantly more than our next nearest, Oxford. So there's things that are already happening, are embedded into the culture of the city. That I've sort of rolled on into the city emissions. So the city emissions have, alongside the council's emissions, have reduced by 45% since 2005, and that's again a comparable reduction to other cities. I was just looking at the stats, and just in case anyone picks them out, it does the per capita reduction is even greater, but that's because the population of the city has increased in that time. So just in case any keen councillors noticed that. So we're doing pretty well. We're doing very well, really, as a city. But obviously, we want to keep the momentum going, and the strategy starts to look at where we, how we progress that. Obviously, as part of the development of the strategy process, we've engaged widely. So we had public engagement during October and November. We did it in conjunction with South Cambridgeshire District Council, but in terms of the responses specific to the City of Cambridge, it was nearly 500 responses. Pretty good coverage across the whole city and from organisations, and Probably like a little bit less so from businesses, but you know, we've got reasonably good coverage across. And what we've tried to do in the sort of evolving, emerging strategy is reflect some of those the bits of feedback that come from that. And there's a section around page 26, 27, where we talk about some of the things how we've responded to that, but I can, you know, answer any questions on that as we go forward. In terms of the new strategy, we've looked to structure that strategy into 3 sections around almost, as I talked about, the city councils, direct impact, and our emissions and what we do and our direct influence over services. So we found that as a sustainable city council. Then the idea of a sustainable city, so what we do and how we work with partners to reduce emissions and to make the city more sustainable. And for example, there are things in there that we don't directly impact on our emissions. So we invest a lot. All our work around housing, again, which the City Council is one of the leading councils in the country in terms of developing housing and retrofit and so on, all of that doesn't come into the City Council's emissions. That's about us enabling our residents to take advantage, to reduce emissions and to hopefully benefit from lower energy bills and so on. That comes into the section on sustainable cities. So that's our you know, not our direct emissions, but it's how we support our residents. So that's in that section. And then we've got a final section on working together for sustainable Cambridge, and that's more about how we use our influence, our convening powers, our working in partnership with many of the other organisations across the city to learn from what we've done and also to try and inspire and encourage more organisations to get onto this journey. So that's the structure of the document. In terms of our direct proposals, we've taken the view, and you can see on page 29 that we've looked at what we refer to as a trajectory of reduction in carbon emissions over the last 11, 12 years. And there's a fairly good linear reduction on that. And we're fairly confident that should continue, obviously subject to some number of conditions such as the ongoing greening or carbon reduction of the grid. But we're reasonably confident that can continue. On the basis of that, that would take us to a kind of target for 2028, and I maybe mentioned 2028 is obviously the council's, you know, the likely end of Cambridge City Council prior to reorganisation of 2,500 tonnes, which is significantly down. And beyond that, we're talking about where we focus on the initiatives that will do that. Those initiatives are not absolutely tied down because things will change, but we've got those. Happy to take questions.
Great, thank you very much, David. Right, so we'll open to questions. I remind everyone that the purpose of this discussion is to provide recommendations to Cabinet on the various proposals that have been laid out in the report and also things that we feel maybe have not been included in the report. And so I think I'll open it up to questions. There's a number of ways we could structure this. We can talk about the City Council own emissions first, perhaps, and then talk about the wider city, and try and do it that way. Any questions from anyone? Councillor Hauk.
How shall we play this? I mean, batches of 3. Oh, I may have 2 batches, so not that many, but
Yeah,
no,
that sounds fine, but just bear in mind, we just concentrate on the City Council own emissions first, perhaps.
Yes, so my first point is actually about the Civic Quarter project, which is probably the largest, or one of the largest decarbonisation projects under our direct control. So, I mean, could officers please outline whether there will be any numbers for the expected energy and carbon savings from these projects and how they relate to the possible costs in terms of borrowing or capital costs or whole life value. And how can we assess, also here in this committee in the future, how the carbon benefits are proportionate to financial investments at this stage. And while on a smaller scale, I would also be interested in these kind of numbers for Clay Farm Centre and the Trumpington Pavilion, which happen to be in my ward. And another, I think, local issue is that the strategy assumes increasing, I think linearly even increasing electrification and continued grid decarbonization. But it does not appear to address the growing energy demand associated with digital services such as AI, cloud computing, and data centers. And many of those sit outside the UK electricity grid. So has the risk of emissions simply being displaced rather than reduced been considered? And does the Council have any scope, for example, through procurement or partnerships, to prioritize digital service providers that can demonstrate sustainable and ethical energy use? These would be my two questions on the local city.
Thank you, Councillor Huck.
I'll start with the first one about the Civic Quarter project. Obviously, that's a project that there's the whole team working up at the moment and working up the details. So I don't, first honestly, is we don't have the details to hand, but the colleagues are working on these, and that will be brought forward by way of a business case and detailed workings to the appropriate, to Cabinet and perhaps Council in due course. So it's very much part of their agenda. They know, the carbon benefits, the carbon savings, as well as the intrinsic benefits to the project will be considered. But I don't have a detail on that.
So you would be part of the 11% of the city councils?
Absolutely.
That's that yellow thing on page 20. So that would be designed to address that?
Yes, very much so.
Right, okay. So I think that's a concern that we've noted.
Yeah, and the question about the sort of data centres and digital impact across the world, that we haven't overtly considered that, and realistic, I think it would be difficult. We could make reference to it. I think realistically it would be difficult to put detailed estimates onto that, but it's certainly one we could consider. And I take the point that we, in terms of procurement, we could be at least looking at what the council does in terms of our digital hosting and whatever else. But it's not something that we've looked at. So that's definitely a useful comment we can take forward.
We also have Lynn Miles up with her hand up online.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry my camera's not working today. I was just going to add on the Civic Quarter project that the specific reduction in carbon will depend a little bit on whether the final designs use on-site generation or whether the district heat network proceeds. In which case, in all cases, the intention is that the Guildhall will be operationally net zero. That is, that's the current goal and the expectation. The Corn Exchange can't be net zero if the energy generation is done on site because of constraints with the fabric of the building. But if it's done by the district heat network, then there will be a substantial carbon reduction. But the final figures will be sort of validated as we work further through the detailed designs, which is happening over the course of this year.
Thank you, Lynn. Just on the AI, do we have a policy about whether we want data centres here in the city or not? Is that something that we would put into a climate change strategy?
I think that might relate to local plan territory. It's not really the territory of the climate change strategy at the moment.
Okay. All right. Councillor Griffin.
Thank you. Tim Griffin, Coleridge Ward. Thank you, David, for the report, and congratulations to everyone working on this. It's a very positive, it presents some very positive progress. I'm really curious about the what's happening with the heat network. What stage are we at with that? Because it seems like a potential, a huge potential win. So I'd just like more detail on where the council is with that plan.
I'm kind of wondering if Lynn might want to come in on that, but I think it's similar insofar as it's an ongoing project. There's lots of work happening. I think there are positive moves or messages coming out around partner engagement, which is crucial to it because it's a lot more than just the city council. So there's lots of moving parts in it. But I think from what I've had most recently, whether Lynn has anything more up to date, things are going in a really, really strong direction. So it feels very positive.
Yeah, that's correct. Happy to confirm all of that. And I think we're expecting to bring an update back to Cabinet in March time. But there's a fair bit of technical work still to work through.
Okay, thank you. So I think that we are concluding that the heat network is an important part of our strategy. I mean, that's also non-city council carbon reduction, but we will be using some of it potentially for the Guildhall, right? Yeah. Okay. Want to come in on that, Rosie?
Yes, just to say that the district heat network project is progressing well. There was discussion around the next update, whether it should come to this committee, but it was decided to go to the Performance and Assets Committee, and that's going in March, because the next stage is around the business case and the plan for the sort of how the structure of the funding would be managed. For example, would we have our own city council energy company? Would it be a joint venture? Would it be totally outsourced to an independent company? So that's sort of the stage that's being worked on currently. But colleges are signed up, both universities are signed up, and the project is progressing well. But obviously it's very complicated. There are some risks. However, alongside the civic quarter network, it would totally revolutionise the council's emissions from our buildings, as well as those other city centre buildings, our swimming pools, colleges, universities, and then ideally other businesses, and there'd be scope to extend it. So going well so far, but no spades in the ground just yet.
Okay, any comments on the heat network? No? So, but I think we're happy to recommend to council, to Cabinet, that we approve of that. Yeah? Right, so I have Councillor Gardner-Smith next.
Thank you. So I'd also like to just sort of welcome and congratulate the council on, the reductions that we have seen, recognising that, a lot of this has been driven through the greening of the grid. I think, over 51%, almost 52% reduction since 2014. And, quotes in there of us being one of the highest performing councils on sustainability nationally, I think is something that we should recognise and, congratulate officers for the incredible work that has been done in this space and the sort of, the thought leadership, I think, that is being provided nationally. So I'll focus on the parts that you note in the report on the city council, direct city council emissions now. So it picks up on the question earlier about the relative importance of the civic quarter project. Clearly, this is a big source of our direct emissions, and I'm interested in officers' views on how easy it would be to meet our suggested emission target in the next strategy if the civic quarter project was not to go ahead. So obviously, the council needs to weigh, balance the cost versus the intended outcome when it comes to our climate strategy and other benefits that the Civic Quarter project would deliver. But how easy would it be to meet our proposed targets if that wasn't delivered and it was put on pause? I'm interested to know your views in that. I've got some other specific questions on our direct emissions from the report, which are a bit more detailed. So I notice in one of the papers about our solar PV generation, it talks about it notes that Mandela House currently has the highest. It is generating the highest electricity from solar PV. I think there's a proposal to sell Mandela House. So how is that being considered in the strategy going forward if we're to lose that? There is, I don't know whether this comes into this section or maybe into sort of behavioural change, but I'm interested to understand how we're enforcing EPC standards on landlords of rental properties. That's probably behavioural change rather than our direct emissions. But also on the, in general, I think the proposed recommendations for the next strategy for our direct emissions all look, it look right. But on the waste vehicles, I don't quite understand what's happened. So we've moved from HVO. So emissions from our vehicles have already reduced 90%. But now we're suggesting that we want to invest further in the electrification of vehicles. So is that a double spend in this area? If we've already reduced emissions by 90%, is that to get us to the 100% emissions reduction, or are we talking about two separate sets of waste vehicles here? Interested to understand a bit more about that. And finally, a sort of more general question about sort of the costs of the strategy going forward. Is it your assessment that essentially as a council we've sort of really been successful at picking off the low-hanging fruit, but actually in order to gain sort of further reductions from our direct emissions, this is where actually we're going to have to invest a lot more money as a council to deliver that? Or actually have we, do you think it's a sort of pretty balanced picture? Thank you.
I think Councillor Moore was going to come in on the waste vehicles, and I'll pick up a little bit.
Yeah, so I can answer. So the waste vehicles, we started we had a plan to electrify the fleet, put together the REN project, the REN project, the solar farm, and because we couldn't get so many electric vehicles initially because of the charging issues, the trial of the HVO started. The trial was very successful. So in the meantime, we've been able to roll out HVO in all of our diesel vehicles. However, there are additional benefits to being electric. There are savings on ongoing maintenance costs. There are air quality improvements that you get from electric vehicles. Unfortunately, from the Liz Truss government, the costs because of the high inflation, the costs of the project for the solar farm went up. So initially we hoped to have 30 electric vehicles charged there. It's now around 20, whereas currently we have around 52 waste vehicles. So the plan would be to have as many as we can electric, but the others to be run with HVO. So we're getting the benefits of both. But as I say, there are additional benefits to electric vehicles, particularly around the air quality. And then there was something about the low-hanging fruit, that absolutely, that's what we've been doing, the cheaper and easier things to do. And that's why now we're moving to projects such as the district heat network, the civic quarter, the solar farm, that are more expensive, more complicated, but once they're done, will also have bigger impacts.
Thank you. So from a strategy perspective, are we suggesting that we carry on as before for the waste vehicles, or we want to move to electric? Totally to electric? What do people think? Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally satisfied with your response in terms of the rationale between why we've taken the approach that we have. And from what I understand, Councillor Moore's suggesting we would have a sort of mixed economy, ultimately, of electric and HVO. Is that right?
Yes, at the moment we're at the max. We've got 4 electric vehicles. We cannot charge any more on the grid. We can't charge more until the solar farm comes on stream, and then it will be around 20. So if we wanted to fully electrify our waste vehicle fleet, we would have to do additional, either another solar farm, but, you know, we haven't done the first one yet. So I think, personally, I think we're on the right track. And by trialling the HVO, because of its success, we've rolled that out across other areas of the council. For example, David mentioned the generators, but also in all of our other vehicles across the council that can use it.
Okay, thank you. Right, so what about the other questions, please?
I'm happy to pick that up if that's helpful, Chair.
Thank you.
There was a question about how far can we get towards our 2028 target if we don't do the civic quarter, I think, which I'm happy to pick up. So I can't give you the exact number off the top of my head, but what I will say is clearly we have got some quite challenging council-owned sort of corporate buildings to retrofit, and you're sitting in one of them. It's an historic building, and those are challenging to get down to net zero standards. So for this building, if we didn't proceed, the conversation would not be should we do the civic quarter or do nothing. It would be should we do the civic quarter scheme as we set out, or will we have to do other also very expensive things to meet at least forthcoming minimum energy efficiency requirements. So it's worth remembering that for all landlords, including us as a landlord, from 2028 we will have to meet a minimum energy performance standard, potentially subject to government confirmation on its consultation, and then from 2029 a more stringent standard. So for every building in our portfolio, both the ones we occupy and the ones we let out, we need to ask ourselves how much would it cost us to meet these minimum regulatory standards which are coming in, which in 2028 would be EPCC, for those of you that are familiar with them from your house, and how much extra will we need to spend to get to operational net zero, and what's worth doing. So we won't be able to do nothing on any of the buildings we own unless we choose to sell them, which is a viable choice. We are currently embarking on a piece of work to look at our whole portfolio and ask ourselves, where does it make sense to invest? Where does it not? So there'll be a sort of series of conversations that would happen about the Guildhall if the decision were not to proceed with the civic quarter, but will also happen about the whole of our portfolio, about where does it make sense to invest, where does it not. This council took a decision a couple of times in the past in the civic quarter that doesn't want to sell the Guildhall. It wants to sort of work with it and refurbish it, and that entails quite a large bill. For any building, if we sell it, that doesn't make the carbon emission problems go away. It just means we're not directly responsible for addressing it, and somebody else would be. Hope that's helpful as a summary.
Yes, thank you. We then have questions about the EPC standards for landlords in the city. Yeah, I think that was the final question.
So again, that's one where, in general, those standards are the responsibility of our tenants where we have commercial properties. So they'd be sort of in the second part of this report in that sense, where we're the landlord, we hold those requirements. They are both affected by those minimum energy standards. So we don't have to do anything for all landlords all commercial landlords, to be thinking about what they need to do to meet minimum energy requirements. Those minimum energy requirements aren't net zero, they're about EPCC, but most sensible businesses will be thinking, Should I invest to take me to EPCC for 2028, to EPCB for 2029, or should I just go straight to net zero? And they'll all be making their own assessments of what is worth doing and not.
I think Samantha Shimon will respond as well.
Yes, hello. So in regard to private residential landlords, again, the government has bringing in new minimum energy efficiency standard, or MEES as they're known. And again, they will need to bring their properties up to an EPCC by the 1st of October 2030. There are some caveats to that, depending on the amount of money that they would need to spend to get it to that level. But generally speaking, that is the methodology of travel.
Can I just ask about that? So how much are we investing at the moment in enforcement, and how much is this going to feature within the future strategy when it comes to capacity to enforce those standards? Because that feels critical.
I'm afraid I don't have that information to hand, but we can come back with that.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Do you want to come back on that particular point? Councillor Griffin.
A related point. This is are we finished with those questions or not? Okay. This is about the 22% for the leisure centres. I assume that the majority of that is the heating of the pools. Is that the case? And if so, it seems the Abbey pool and the King's Hedges pools would be outside of the region for the heat network. So what can we do to improve those pools? I mean, it seems like we probably need to replace the current heating systems. Is that the case?
So you're right, just to put it in context, you're right, the Parkside pool would potentially be in the scope, on the geographical scope, if you like, for the heat network. There is work ongoing pretty much as we speak, looking at potential projects for the Abbey pool and what was the other one you mentioned? Sorry, King's Hedges. Yeah, so there are we've got people looking at those projects at the moment to see what can be done. So they in terms of direction of travel, we know that it's the largest emissions come from our swimming pools and our leisure centres. So significant work is underway to look at those and to try and identify what projects are workable. And in line with all the projects coming out of this and sort of directed from the strategy, they will come forward with business cases in due course to go in front of the council. There are also the kinds of projects that historically have been quite successful in attracting external funding. So, you know, one of the things is it's not all about the council, it's also about looking for external funding to help take these projects forward. And given we've got a good track record, that puts us in a good position to hopefully go back for further funds.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we have had quite a few projects to reduce the energy use at particularly Abbey Pool, air source heat pump installation, solar panels, updating all of the sort of building energy management system. But obviously there is still a way to go. However, there are also, of course, you could say, environmental and sustainability benefits to providing leisure services for residents. These aren't just carbon sinks that we're sort of burning fossil fuels willy-nilly. These are providing vital physical and mental health services for residents that keep some of us sane. And so that's just to highlight that all of these reductions in the council emissions are whilst providing vital services to residents, and that we've been able to cut the emissions whilst continuing to provide those services. It's not been a cut in service. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, but it's interesting. I mean, I kind of assumed, looking at the numbers, that because it's the highest emitting, it is the highest activity that, it's the activity that creates the highest percentage of our emissions. So we've done a lot already, it seems, but there's still quite a lot more to go.
Sorry, I should, in response to Councillor Griffin's question, I should have also mentioned another way where we're carefully trying to get more investment, and it's not just our own investment. So one of the things we're currently doing is we're currently out to tender for the ongoing management of our leisure facilities, so through the leisure management contract. And part of the tender process is asking prospective operators to come up with suggestions, or not suggestions, proposals that they would introduce to further reduce emissions and make our buildings even more efficient. And that is being embraced. The process is ongoing. It's obviously a confidential process, but there are people coming from the various companies who would like to run our facilities to survey the buildings and to look at them. And our colleague just reminded me that the King's Hedges and Abbey Pools also have solar panels as we speak, but there are other things that can be done. So we've identified some things that could be done, but also we're opening it up to the private sector operators to look at what they would recommend. And that's a win-win, because we reduce our emissions, they reduce their running costs.
Right, agreed. And so, oh gosh, it's just gone on my head. Yeah, so am I right then that the heat network is going to be transformational then for the leisure centres as well?
Just for, realistically, in terms of geography, just for Parkside Pool.
So that's key for a lot of...
So that's, I guess that's the point was, I think was mentioned earlier, about how it operates. We're a key partner in that, and it's really about us offering the opportunity to partner organisations to be part of that also.
All right, now finally coming to Councillor Pounds. Sorry, it's taken us quite a while.
My question is actually a citywide issue rather than a council issue, so I don't know if you've got more council ones before I go ahead.
We don't seem to have paid much attention to that. I suggest you just go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to ask, a little while ago, probably 2 or 3 years, the GCP introduced some delivery vehicles that were pedal-powered, basically, assisted cycling, and quite a few firms picked this up and started using them. And I'm aware that traffic is a big issue in Cambridge, not just for congestion, but also for carbon emissions. So I just wondered if you had any plans to try and encourage businesses, because they seem to have disappeared, these really nice little vehicles, and yet they were brilliant, especially for, I should say that I'm the councillor for Romsey, where we have small Victorian streets. They were superb for getting around those small streets and for not blocking them up with diesel delivery vehicles. So I wondered if there are any plans to try and encourage or incentivise businesses to use those active travel vehicles. Also, there have in the past been initiatives to encourage employers to not allow their employees to drive and park in their businesses, but to use active travel. And I wondered if there are any plans as well for that. Thank you.
I think Lynn's going to come in. I think, I was just going to say that transport largely sits out with our council, with the Combined Authority, County Council and GCP. But I think, and Lynn I'm sure will add to this, but I think in terms of our strategy, the Section 3, where we're talking about encouraging and supporting and working in partnership, we would certainly actively encourage it. And one of my colleagues just reminded me, we have cargo bikes that we have for staff to use. So we are trying to set an example, but I'm sure Lynn's got more detail on this.
Yeah, I was just going to make a similar point, which is that most of our transport strategy and delivery happens either through the Combined Authority, which is the Strategic Transport Authority, which is responsible for delivering the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy during this year, or through the Greater Cambridge Partnership, of which we're a member, which delivers various projects, including the electric cargo bike trial that you raised, Councillor Pounds. On the cargo bike trial, I would need to follow up on the specifics. I believe an operator has recently gone out of business there, and we need to look at And I'm not off the top of my head certain whether those were GCP funded vehicles or not. So we'd need to look at that. On the question more broadly of how we encourage more businesses to take advance of shared mobility and electric and micro-mobility for last mile deliveries, that is squarely within the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy. This council has a representative on the Transport Committee at the Combined Authority, and that strategy is under development, and officers are plugged into that too. So we can influence that as part of our wider grouping of authorities, but don't have direct and sole control over it. There is still, as Councillor Pounds highlights, a need to think about how we tackle congestion in Cambridge and reduce vehicle mileage, both because of the environmental impacts and because of congestion impacts.
Okay, thank you very much. You okay? Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, I think this sits within the city section, but it probably crosses more widely. I just wanted to ask, so it mentions how the greatest proportion of the council's emissions, well, a larger portion is from council sites that demand use of gas, like the Corn Exchange, the crematorium, the communal areas and sheltered housing. Is there much of a plan in place to start moving and facing away from gas use? I'd imagine a lot of that is linked to boilers. And is there a plan to move away from that in future? And then, this is possibly a broader question, but there's reference in here to how we're extending the strategy to cover the move to a unitary authority. Do we have much idea at this point whether once we move to a unitary authority, will that give us more levers to pull in terms of our climate strategy and presumably hopefully more influence over traffic management in particular?
To the last one, yes. I mean, we've just touched on it in terms of, you know, at the moment the council doesn't have much involvement or certainly direct control over transport and so on. So you know, I guess one of the rationales for unitary authorities is to be able to bring all that under one governance structure, one organisation. In terms of I think the point about the use of gas, yeah, I mean the majority of the initiatives we're looking to do to decarbonise our buildings are about moving away from gas, and you know, whether that's air source heating, whether it's solar, or whether it's the heat network, it's moving in that direction. So yeah, it's one of the biggest ways in moving away from fossil fuels, and that dovetails with the fact that as the grid becomes greener, then you know we're tying into renewable energy sources.
Okay, thank you. What was the first question? It was. So that was part 2, wasn't it?
Can I just, because Lynn did mention it earlier, just that's exactly what the team are doing, reviewing all of the buildings owned by the council to understand which boilers will need replacing first and looking into alternative options.
Is that what's called improved business management in the report? I was going to ask a question about that because it's very vague.
I think the improved business management, although I don't remember where that's written, but there is the improved management of your heating system, so understanding it better and being sure that you have proper controls. For example, you might not need to update the boiler, you just might need better controls so you can make sure it's turned off at night, for example, rather than, so it's more managing the heating that you've already got.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add to the question, as I think several people have mentioned, we are looking at all our assets and trying to identify where we can move to different systems, but we're not saying in the strategy we're going to be able to do it all by 2028. So there's a process of prioritisation and understanding where we need to invest, where we can't invest, or where the crematoria is quite a difficult one, for example. So our retrofit manager is looking at that with great interest, but that we are doing that work now, but we're not necessarily going to have all the detail when we publish the climate change strategy. It's work in progress.
Well, a strategy, is it just a strategy, isn't it? We don't have
It's
to
a
have
strategy,
business
and there's an action plan associated with the strategy, but all the detail on all the schemes is not going to be in the strategy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor Glasberg.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to thank the officers. I think this is great to have this amount of detail of what the council is doing, and it's very impressive. But basically, the council only 0.7, you said, I think, of the city emissions. So comparing with other areas, on page 23, you say the public sector are far more, 16% rather than the average of 3%, and you explain why that is. Obviously, we do have reasons why our percentage emissions on that would be so much higher. But you actually, on commercial properties and businesses, that's also much higher than in other areas. It's 23% in Cambridge. So I just wonder why that is, and if you think there's anything that the council could do to address this. Because obviously that's a very large proportion of the city's emissions. Thank you.
So just to address both points, we maybe should have said that the term public sector relates to education bodies, and it includes the universities. So that's it. In terms of a commercial, it's largely because we've got a very busy shopping centre, and it's a vibrant city centre that has lots and lots of retail, and also we have lots of businesses based here. So it's the success in many ways of Cambridge as a commercial centre, both retail and also business, is probably why that, if you compare with other other cities. And I guess we're also talking, it's all relative, because if a percentage of one, for example, the council is lower and other things reduce, that percentage becomes bigger. Because if you remember, earlier on, we have seen a reduction overall in the city, in city emissions in that time period. Not as marked as the city council's reduction, but it has been a reduction during that period. But we can maybe tease out a little bit more information on that.
I imagine we have very leaky old university buildings now.
And I suppose the historic, sorry, I should have said the historic nature of the buildings, and that's retail, commercial, and university.
Yeah, so my second question was, is there anything, do you think that there's anything that the City Council could be doing to address this?
I think that there are several things we can do. One is about engagement, awareness, working with landlords, working with the building owners, and talking to them about what they could potentially look at and consider. And the EPC ratings might also come into play for that. So I think there is work we can do around liaison, behavioural, awareness raising, sharing best practice, which is a key part of the strategy. Sort of part 3 is about how we can convene, share best practice. There are businesses doing great work on their estates. We have, I think, our science park is looking at how it can decarbonise itself. So there is quite a lot of work actually going on in the city that we're trying to, that we, through the consultation on the strategy, asked for information and evidence about, with some really interesting responses. And we plan to continue that work, so we're able to sort of unearth really what is happening across commercial estates. So I think there is work. It's partly about awareness raising, it's partly about sharing best practice, it's partly about regulations, and possibly also behaviour of the people that occupy those buildings. And lastly, I think in other cities, there are examples of how collective kind of schemes have sort of helped commercial properties. So in Norwich, there's something I think called Norwich Solar and things like that. So there are things like that that we could look at, but discussions on that kind of thing are not advanced. So I think, but thank you for raising it, something we can look into.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Just to say that obviously we've got the district heat network project, which would cover a lot of those, not all of them, because they're not all city centre, but it would cover. There's also the local plan coming, which would obviously talk to new developments, but there are plans for new developments, so it's not just about reducing the emissions from the buildings we have, but from those of the future. And then we've got the city leaders, the Cambridge Climate City Leaders Group, which has representatives from the public sector and also many of those large businesses. And so that's a forum for sharing ideas of what's, sharing projects for what's going on across the city. And actually one of the requests at the most recent one was to link up, because there's lots of innovation in Cambridge. And then there are also lots of organisations who would be happy to be the guinea pigs. And so we're looking at ways where we can, or maybe not us, because it doesn't all have to be the council, but somebody in the city leaders can help to link up those people that are creating new or designing new innovations with those people that would be happy to trial it in their buildings. So there's a lot going on, but then there's a lot still to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Moore. Okay, Councillor Divkovic.
Thank you. There's a lot in the climate strategy regarding reducing emissions, but one of the top challenges that was mentioned in the consultation was water scarcity. I'd just like to know a little bit more about what the Council's climate strategy is to address that concern. Thank you.
I can come in on that if that's helpful, Chair. I just wanted to add a little bit that the water scarcity issue is a really recognised issue for particularly for any potential growth that happens in this area, and it's something that government recognises and has sort of rowed in behind the city in trying to address. So mostly the discussions on that are taking place through the local plan and through the Cambridge Growth Company, where the government has formed a water scarcity action group, which is looking at both provision of water and also wastewater treatment, and trying to deal with those issues there. So in this strategy, I think we will signpost that work, but we're not generating new initiatives through this thinking. That's largely happening through the Growth Company and through the local plan and with central government. What we will report on is the various things that we're doing with the water scarcity funding that's been given to us by central government. So, for example, we're hoping to initiate a project soon to look at retrofitting some of the pools with wastewater recovery, which will reduce water usage by about 90% at some of our swimming pools. So there are some specific projects we'll take forward there, but the overall question of how we're going to deal with water scarcity in this area is one that's being taken through the Growth Company.
Chair, there's also, if I can make a link back to Councillor Hawke's comment earlier on about data centres and the concern. I just had a comment from my colleague to remind that the data centre, one of the challenges of data centres is water cooling. And in the past, there haven't been a lot, but there have been some approaches about data centres for Cambridge and surrounding area. And generally speaking, they've been knocked on the head or not able to progress due to the lack of water. So it's almost a virtuous circle or something there that mitigates against that. Doesn't stop them being elsewhere in the world.
Shame we can't use them to heat our buildings.
Yes.
Very quickly, it's small, it won't resolve the water crisis problem, but we do have a project to reduce water use at Parkside and trialling a sort of new rainwater harvesting and recycling project. So we're also trialling new innovations.
Okay, good stuff. Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Councillor Divkovic thankfully asked one of my questions about water scarcity, because unfortunately I think we are already at the point where we know we can't reverse climate change anymore. So it's not just about the causes of climate change, but also dealing with the consequences. And I think water scarcity and its effect will be one of the main issues here for Cambridge. The other question I had, and it's been mentioned a few times already, Greater Cambridge Local Plan. I think that will be quite a crucial instrument to implement our climate strategy, especially if we want to go beyond the 0.7% that we have under our direct controls. I was just wondering if the Councillor could briefly outline how this climate change strategy links to the local plan in practice, and if they actually have suggestions for actions or initiatives that we can pursue here, for example, via this committee. And in particular, is there anything, or are there any areas where the ambitions of the strategy, the climate strategy and the local plan, are in conflict with each other, and something that we could therefore sort of discuss here. And maybe because I didn't ask my first question, I can say, I would just like to comment, actually, I really welcome the strategy's cautious approach to carbon offsetting. So it's clearly treated as a last resort rather than a primary tool, and I think that also responds well to the concerns raised in the public survey. So I think that's fantastic. And maybe finally, more comment as well. So public engagement, of course, is key, but I think in Cambridge we really have a chance not just to reach our local residents, but actually reach the world and educate or even train and make aware lots of people who come here to Cambridge, via education, the universities, or maybe even putting posters on the market square or something like that. So the world comes to us, and I think we really have a great opportunity here to affect to people's behavior globally and not just locally. Thank you.
I'll start on the local plan point, but there might be others who are more knowledgeable. Certainly we've been engaging closely with colleagues in the shared planning service in relation to the climate change strategy, and we're looking at the policies. I think it's fair to say that the draft local plan has some fairly far-reaching measures in it in terms of impacting on climate, and just going back to the earlier very recent comment about water scarcity. There's discussions around new build properties having relying on quite low water usage, which is pushing the boundaries, but actually is really positive to try and address those issues. So there's very close engagement. Councillor Moore mentioned the climate leaders group just last week. There was someone from the local plan team talking about the environmental and sustainability measures within the local plan. So it's not only influencing the strategy, but it's also influencing that wider piece. And the point about engagement across the world, that the organisations like the Cambridge, I get the initials, Sustainable Institute for Climate Leadership is very much that. They're at the heart of this, and they're engaging worldwide. They've got outposts in, I think, Berlin, in other countries across Europe. So that is very much, and they see a lot of the work that's coming from the climate change strategy and a lot of the things, other climate innovation work that's happening in Cambridge is world leading, and opportunities to share that. So it raises our position, and we have the opportunity to assist with that and help other colleagues in other agencies do the similar. And point about the offsetting is noted. It's something that I think is a challenge, and our drive at the moment is to reduce carbon emissions where we can see them, rather than anything that's maybe less regulated or less relevant. I think it becomes difficult for local people to look at offsetting out with Cambridge. So our focus is very much on Cambridge.
Can I just add to David's point about us working with climate leaders and some of the members there? I think part of our new strategy is also has an element of working with our innovation community. And we have there's evidence that Innovate Cambridge published in the autumn about our climate tech cluster that exists here and the solutions that entrepreneurs are developing here that they obviously want to scale, take global and grow. So part of the opportunity we have in Cambridge is also looking at that, how we can grow a new kind of sector really amongst our life sciences and technology companies. So it's a really exciting time. And the collaboration we already have with organisations like Innovate Cambridge, Cambridge Zero, CISL is a really important part of the strategy. And the other thing just to mention to the committee is that we also have a twinning partnership, or I'm not sure if twinning is quite the right word, but we are engaging with Bucharest, for example, at the moment and trying to learn more about what they're doing. So I think that sort of international outlook is very much part of Cambridge's way of doing things. So there's equally things we can probably learn from other places as well that we're keen to integrate into our work.
Okay, thank you. So we're coming to a point where I want to switch to the next topic. I have on my list Councillor Gardner-Smith, Councillor Swift, and then Councillor Garsberg. But then I think I'd like to draw things to a close, if possible. Councillor Gardner-Smith. Oh, sorry. Councillor Thornborough wanted to comment on the local plan item.
Oh, yes, so I'm Councillor Katie Thornborough. I'm the Cabinet Member for Planning and Transport, and thank you for raising the local plan. The emerging local plan, it is one of the most ambitious in the country, bar one borough in London, and there's a very important footnote in the National Planning Policy Framework which refers to the Climate Change 2008 Act and how we need to get there. But the difference between what you're talking about and the local plan is by 2050, 80% of the buildings exist already, and the local plan can't adapt the existing environment. It's mainly about the new places, and we're very ambitious for that. But the climate change strategy very much affects existing buildings and retrofitting and looking at water and things like that. So this strategy and the evidence that you're discussing is incredibly important and feeds into the local plan. So it's great hearing all the detail that you're talking about. Thank you.
Thanks. So it's been noted a number of times that council's direct emissions are 0.7%. So they are a fraction of the emissions of Cambridge City. So I just wanted to take a step back for a second to understand a bit about the strategic approach and how much or whether it's going to change in the next strategy when it comes to the balance of our efforts and resources between focus on reducing direct city emissions versus efforts to use both our indirect power and our sort of behavioural influencing power. Because, of course, there are things, it's not just the sort of woolly feeling engagement and advice with other emitting industries in Cambridge. There are things that we can do, for instance, through our retrofit programme, which isn't included in our direct emissions, enforcement of EPC standards, which we mentioned before, how much resource we want to put into that, and also using our procurement power to leverage better sustainability from our suppliers. So first sort of question is on the balance, whether the balance in our efforts is going to change, whether we've got that right in this, in the previous strategy, because of course our direct emissions are just a fraction of the overall pie. And then what I did find more difficult to assess from the paper, which was really helpful when it comes to our direct emissions, was really the progress that we've made on those other parts of the climate strategy. So, council direct emissions is just the one part, but we've got lots of other areas where we said we wanted to invest, energy and resource into. But it's difficult to, I don't think we've got much information about the progress made in those areas from what we can see here. I don't expect you to provide that now, but so for instance, I'm really interested in the progress we've made around our retrofit programme. You know, not just with our own stock, but, you know, working with registered social landlords, you know, in terms of the sustainability of their stock. I'm interested in adaptation as well, you know, as been mentioned by Councillor Hawke, that, you know, we are in a place now where we have to adapt to climate change. So, how, you know, how's that been through the last iteration of the strategy? Yeah, so those are just a couple of areas that, you know, I think would be interesting to understand, have more detail on the progress made, you know, so that we understand how they're going to feature in the next phase of the strategy.
Yeah, I think, Lynn Miles, yeah, can we have brief answers, please?
Yes, I'll be as brief as I can. Just on the sort of wider balance point, your second point's about detail we'll note and take away. On your sort of bigger picture question about have we got the balance right, I think at any given time, these strategies are kind of snapshot of where we are. We've done some of the quick and easy things and the things that we could easily get government funding for. Right now, you're going to see a strategy that's reflective of us at a point where we've got a few big irons in the fire that might well make a really big difference to our own emissions. And we know we've got some work to do now to understand a bit better the next bit. So the closer we get to net zero, the more we get into the stuff that is tricky, technically difficult, more expensive or less payback. For each of those things, we'll have a look and we'll do a sort of business case process. Does this make sense? Is it going to pay for itself? Will it actually increase operating costs or reduce them and so on? And we'll take a view. And you're right there, I think. I'd be quite interested in a steer from this committee if it has a sense of where it is better to be, because as we get closer and closer towards net zero, we are going to have more and more difficult decisions, some of which will be difficult to justify the funding for, and it might be that this group takes a decision, the council takes a decision they'd rather we look at, our housing stock retrofit, etc., etc. I think those are legitimate questions to begin to ask ourselves. I don't think we need to nail the answer in this strategy necessarily, but I am very interested in your collective views on it. At the moment, the view of the cabinet is, we have this stretch target for ourselves as an organisation, and that should remain. But like I say, I think this next strategy will be a sort of snapshot of our thinking on that.
Yeah, just to kind of comment on that, from my perspective, yeah, that's why I was quite keen to see what we have done already, because we've had a really substantial reduction already, but we seem to have achieved it through the greening of the grid, but also, using our electric vehicles, changing them to electric and hydrogenated vegetable oil. We've talked about the cultural events team with HVO generators and some air source heat pumps in our leisure centres and some kind of better housekeeping. And we seem to have achieved an enormous amount just from that. And our future projects are a lot riskier. I mean, the Guildhall is extremely expensive. We've got the district heat network, which sounds fantastic, but is quite risky, and I think will also be quite expensive. So I don't think that, the next steps are going to be particularly easy to do. There are some clearly that are easier than others, but I think you're right. It will get more difficult. Does anyone have any comment on that? I think it's a good thing to feed back to Cabinet on. Okay.
Just very quickly, we do, in all the previous iterations, when we had the different committee system, every October, roughly, we presented an update to the strategy, and in there is a list of all of the projects that we've done. It's a lot more than the few that have been mentioned this evening. I don't know whether those will also be in. At some point, it'll just get too long to keep having in the strategy. And just on your point, it was sort of suggested by Lynn, but actually the council set a target of being a net zero carbon council by 2030, so that's what we're working towards. if we wanted to change that, then we would need to.
Okay.
Can I just come back on the point of, because this strategy is a work in progress, it is already becoming a long document, so we are having to be clever about how we give information about former successes. So it's likely to be in the appendices or, you know, available online or whatever. But yeah, but as Councillor Moore said, we have an annual greenhouse gas emissions report that specifically looks at our emissions, and that will continue. And I think that the strategy will be supported by you know, at least annual updates.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Chair. Just having a look at page 29, and it says that the council carbon emissions has gone down from 8,000 tonnes of CO2 in 2014 to half that, 4,000 tonnes of CO2 in 2024, which is great. And it's 0.7% of the total carbon emissions are from Cambridge City Council. But my question is that if it's reduced by 50%, does that mean that the 0.7% is less than it was a few years ago? Or are all of the other things like domestic sources, shops, transport, health and education, are they all going down as well at the same time in absolute terms? Or is it just as a percentage of the whole? Because that is rather fundamental, isn't it?
Go on, Liz.
It's both. So we have gone down as a proportion. Sorry, I do not have the stats, but I mean, if you really wanted them, we could look back at previous greenhouse gas reports or climate change updates. But so overall, everything in Cambridge across Britain has gone down because of moving away from burning of coal. But our proportion of the city's emissions has also reduced. But of course, the city's grown, and some of our services have had to grow in relation to that. For example, waste. We've built new community centres, but then other things like we haven't built lots of a swimming pool per person. So it's complicated.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Glasberg.
Yes, I wanted to ask you on page, wait a minute. Yes, I wanted to ask you about the tree strategy. Obviously, trees are recognised as being very important in terms of reducing carbon emissions. Obviously, they're also very important for biodiversity. And your survey of residents showed that trees are really important for Cambridge residents. You're developing, obviously, the tree canopy programme and talking about nature recovery programmes, which are obviously very popular. But on page 84, you've got question 27 says, how supportive are you of the council taking stronger measures to protect existing trees that provide climate resilience benefits? There was 96% support for that. So my question really is about what is the council actually doing to further that? Because a lot of the trees that are going to be planted, the new trees, are going to be saplings. They're not going to provide benefits really for many years to come, whereas the trees that we've already got are of vital importance. And we can't suddenly replace things that are like 50 years old. So obviously there's a huge amount of development going on in Cambridge, and it seems to me that developers, their normal first action is to want to clear the site, remove all the trees and hedges on a site, and that usually gets planning permission. So there are often conditions attached to that, and they are required to replant to plant new things. Again, those things will be saplings, and they're not going to replace what is lost. So I wanted to ask, what is being done, first of all, to make officers aware of how important it is, because many of these developments, it surely should not be necessary to fell mature trees. And as I say, it's something that I know grieves residents deeply. There's trees being felled along Poole Way. I don't know if you've seen that, for a development. Obviously, at Alston Croft, trees were felled in protected open space for a development. These things matter deeply to residents, and I just wonder what is being done, as I say, to make sure that officers are taking every step they can when looking at development proposals, looking at planning applications, to keep trees wherever possible.
Okay,
And also, sorry, to monitor, if there are conditions, to monitor that the trees are being replaced, and if they're not, to enforce it, because I understand that a lot of conditions are not being met. Trees are just not being planted, and there is no enforcement.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether the officers here are able to answer that. Councillor Thornborough, thank you.
Yes, thank you for your points. Yes, so there is the tree canopy consultation is out at the moment, and I think that's very important that you look at that. But within planning, we have currently net biodiversity gain, which is a minimum of 10%, and we have an aspiration for 20%, and that continues into the emerging local plan, and we have a proposed policy in the emerging local plan for larger sites to provide 30% tree canopy, but that's when the trees are fully grown, and the policies within the emerging local plan really strengthen the protection of trees, not just above ground, but ensuring there's enough below ground for the roots, and also much more about maintenance and the right trees in the right place and taking into account climate change. But you're right about the build out of a lot of housing developments was very weak on delivery of the planting in the open space. And we've done an audit of what's happening in South Cambs, and it is terrible in some cases. So we're looking at how we can prevent that with enforcement. And we're looking into something like having a bond, which is part of a planning application. So that would be a financial retention. That means that if the developer disappears or the subcontractor disappears, that the council has the finances to put in place and maintain the landscape, which should be delivered through the development, because it is so important for our communities. So we recognise that enforcement is a problem generally mainly with housing developments, and we're looking into and trying to work on that. Thank you.
If I can just add to that, whilst it is a technical area around the trees and the urban forestry strategies going forward, it is going to the same cabinet meeting, and we have been engaging closely with the relevant teams. So we're trying to create as much of a joined up approach as we can.
Councillor Swift, was it a point on the? Well, yeah, okay, then go ahead.
Yeah, just about the trees. In other parts of the country, for example in Sussex, where I come from, if you've got a housing estate and there's a big old tree, like an oak tree or something, then the houses are built round it as a sort of central feature. Whereas here, they seem to just sort of flatten it and then plant little saplings. And it does seem to be a regional difference that East Anglia, or Cambridge City, they sort of, instead of actually building the housing estates around the trees, they just cut them down. And I just wondered if there's anything we could do to actually stop that from happening.
Well, I think we've got the local plan, which I think Councillor Thornborough has already talked about, so perhaps we can kind of call a halt there. Very quickly, if it's a quick question.
Yes, I mean, just one comment. Actually, growing trees can actually be more efficient at carbon sequestration than mature trees. Of course, there are other benefits of mature trees, but it's not all bad if you plant new trees. Of course, it's not a reason to chop down existing trees. Another thing is, I once got inspired by Singapore, so they call themselves the city in the garden, or garden in the city, I don't know, one or both ways around, because they require every new house or development to have 30% biodiversity area. And they do that by having roof gardens and putting lots of interesting plants on their buildings and walls and stuff like that. I don't know if that's something we could copy in Cambridge, but maybe there are still some options that we haven't explored yet.
Well, I think our local plan is extremely ambitious in that area. So let's call a halt there and just to think about summarising what we want to recommend to Cabinet. I think we have a number of very large projects and relatively risky ones. The Guildhall, the district heat network, and so I think there's concern from councillors that's been expressed about what happens if they don't go ahead. I think there's a lot of smaller items, so things like what are they called? Heat pumps. Heat pump in all our buildings. We're reviewing all our buildings to see what their energy status is and what we need to do with them, whether we to invest in them or sell them. And I think we are all sort of keen to see that happening. We are keen on the innovation that was talked about. That and lucky to have lots of people willing to try and things out and experiment. So I think that's a key part of the strategy that we should have in there. There's concern about the balance of our efforts. Are we spending too much money on our own emissions, which are only 0.7% of the total, and should we be doing more to encourage and possibly enforce emission control in the commercial and the domestic arena? The water scarcity group, there's been concern mentioned here, but it's actually being dealt with through another strategy, the Water Scarcity Action Group. So we are less concerned about that for this particular strategy. We are very keen on having offsetting as the last resort. We haven't really talked about how we might do that and what level that might be, but that is we think that should be the last resort. Okay. Is there anything else that you think that we should say to Cabinet? Back to officers.
Well done.
Yeah, well, yeah, to the officers, you mean? Yes, yeah. Okay, yes, would endorse that too. Yeah. And we would like to see more information on the retrofit programme. Yeah. Councillor Moore.
The new retrofit team are working on a retrofit strategy. That's what we hope to bring. So that will sit alongside this. I mean, there'll be some information in it, but it's plans to be its own strategy.
Okay, yes. I know that is the largest element of the non-council, or the largest element of the city, the non-council emissions. Okay, all right. Are we okay with that for this item? Should we move on? Okay. Oh, do you want a break? Do you want a break? Yeah, let's have a 5-minute break. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, everyone. We are now going to restart the meeting and with item number 7, which is the Cambridge City Homelessness Review. We are joined by Samantha Shimon, Assistant Director for Housing and Health. Samantha, would you like to introduce the report, please?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. What I'll do is I'll set the scene a little bit, and then I'm joined by an external consultant from a company called PPL, so I'll introduce him in a moment. So just to give you a bit of a picture of homelessness, so there's been a number of changes sort of that kicked off really in sort of 2018 with the Homelessness Reduction Act. So we've had sort of a significant number of years now since that came in. Our strategy that we have to have, our homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, was due to come to an end, and it was the right time for us to look at having a review of the whole system within Cambridge. So not just what do we do as a team, but actually there's lots of third-party elements to our system within Cambridge, a lot more so than actually many other local authorities have, which is great that we've got so much going on. But it was a really good opportunity to commission a review that looked at that whole system, as well as what we also do within our statutory function as a city council. So last year we procured a review. We've done it in a phased way. So this is the first part of which is to do the review. We then have, within the procurement that we've done, the ability to then progress to phase 2, which will be the development of the strategy, and also we have some potential funding to help us commence sort of some of the actions that fall out of that strategy. So that's where we are at the moment. So I'll introduce Joe to you. Joe is the lead consultant with PPL, the organisation that was successful in winning that review with the City Council. PPL have done a number of these reviews with other local authorities, and Joe's also got quite a lot of homelessness background. He's worked, for example, for Crisis, which I'm sure you've all heard of, one of the main homelessness charities nationally. So Joe brings a wealth of experience in homelessness with him. So Joe, are you there?
Apparently he doesn't seem to be online.
Oh, okay, hang on, let me message. Just message, so I've been messaging him trying to give him an update of when to join.
Okay. Do you think he's going to be joining very quickly, or should we move on?
I'm hoping he is. He's done some slides for us as well.
Councillor Griffin.
Why is this report confidential?
Okay, we've had this discussion. It's a really good question. It has now been republished and it is now public in a slightly redacted form. So there were a couple of paragraphs that we didn't want to make public. So we have taken those out, and most of the report is there.
Public version that doesn't have the appendix at all. It's not there at all. So, oh, it's a previous one. Okay, so great. I think that clears it up.
So just to clarify, I sent round an amended version of the appendix early this afternoon, and it's been published on the website.
Clears it up.
Okay, so I think we have Joe online now.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Is it straight over to me, Samantha, or?
Yes, so Joe, I've done an introduction both to the review that we've done, the way we've phased the procurement, and then a little bit of background about yourself and PPL. So yeah, if you're happy to commence with the slides that you've pulled together to kick off.
Brilliant. I've just realised I can't share my screen currently, and therefore the slides. So is the person who's kind of owning the Teams meeting able to just give me that permission, if that's all right? Is that possible?
Yeah, people are trying to do that now.
Ah, cool. Brilliant.
I mean, in the meantime, I'd like to say that I think this is a really excellent and very thorough report, and I think it's going to provide a very good basis for the discussion this evening. So thank you for that.
No worries. I'll tell you what I'll do. While we're trying to do that, I'll start. And apologies if I repeat any of the introductions Samantha's already given, but I'll try and keep the intros brief. They're being shared. Brilliant. There we go. Thanks, Samantha. Brilliant. If we just go, if I just ask for the slides, if we just move on. So I just thought it'd be helpful to just situate this review within the broader context. I'm sure of which will be familiar to a lot of you, but I think it's just helpful. We have a new national homelessness plan now that was published in December. So you would have seen that we've been keen to reconcile the findings from this review and the recommendations so that they align with the national plan. Obviously, you'll be aware of the new funding settlement for local government, and there have been some particular changes around homelessness and rough sleeping funding, all of which is now consolidated into a single grant with temporary accommodation now allocated via the general fund. And there's been some other consolidations in related areas as well. Obviously, I don't need to tell you about local government reorganisation proposals now submitted and on the horizon locally. And there are two very important kind of legislative changes as well in regards to homelessness. So we have the first provisions of the Renters' Rights Act that will be implemented in May this year, so the first phase of that. And we also have the Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act, which was actually passed in 2023, but is starting to be phased in over the next year or two as well. And you'll have seen there's other related initiatives. Obviously, homelessness is a whole system issue, and particularly around things like neighbourhood health and pride of place as important national initiatives impacting on homelessness as well. Can we just have the next slide, if that's all right, Sam? I now realise you may have just talked through some of this, so I won't dwell on this, but just to kind of reiterate where we are, we, PPL, have conducted the review with council and system colleagues over the last 4 months. We're now at the stage of finalising and talking about the review, obviously the next phase being developing the strategy and then implementation. Next slide, if that's all right, Samantha. So I appreciate if this is quite small on your screen in the room. I just thought it'd be helpful to show, I guess, our key lines of inquiry. So obviously, homelessness review is a statutory requirement, so there are things that we definitely have to look at broadly in those 4 areas. So the current strategic landscape around homelessness in Cambridge, current and future levels of homelessness, and ideally some future projections around that. What we currently have available locally in terms of accommodation and broad services, what resources do we have to tackle homelessness at a local level, not just financial resources, but broader as well, And what we were asked to do as part of this commission as well was there are some specific areas within our specification to explore in a bit more detail with City Council colleagues, which we did as well. Next slide, please, Sam. One of the other things we did fairly early on in the review was a pathway and service mapping workshop. And this was kind of one of the key outputs of that. And you'll see in the main body of the review, we've explored the current service system through different lenses and different groups of people and what we're kind of calling these pathways, which are outlined there. So one is around young people, 16 to 24, and care leavers. Another one is around victims of domestic abuse. There's one around those that are kind of deemed priority need under statutory homelessness legislation, so both families and priority single households. There's then one around those that are found deemed non-priority under statutory homeless legislation, and those experiencing rough sleeping and the more acute forms of homelessness. There's also one, that pathway 5, around those of insecure immigration status, including those with no recourse to public funds as well. And lastly, you can see that kind of catch-all at the bottom is specifically looking at those experiencing severe and multiple disadvantage, defined as kind of co-occurring homelessness, substance misuse, mental health, domestic abuse, and/or contact with the criminal justice system as well, which can be in any of the pathways there. Next slide, if that's all right, Samantha. So I definitely know you can't read this probably in the room, but I think it was just more to show you one of the other outputs on that workshop, which we did quite a detailed mapping exercise of what kind of services exist locally at the moment. I guess the key thing I just wanted to highlight in this one is that point around, you'll see many of these aren't homelessness services. There's a whole group of our statutory partners. There's social housing providers, private, rented landlords. There's some commissioned services, non-commissioned services, supported housing, all the services that the City Council offer. And also, importantly, the broader kind of advocacy and co-production methods we have locally to involve and engage people with lived experience and make sure their voices are incorporated into our local response as well. So I just thought that was quite a helpful visual. Next slide, please, Samantha. Yes, just in terms of executive summary, as alluded to, obviously the draft report that I think you've got as part of your papers is very long. But in terms of a headline executive summary and what we found from the review over the last 4 months, I should say we've done a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of interviews with various groups across the local area. We've had a cross-system steering group that we facilitated, and that's met 3 times during the production of the review. And we've had really good engagement, actually, from both statutory and non-statutory partners. We've worked with our partners Groundswell, who are an inclusion health and peer research charity, to do the direct lived experience research part of the review. So there has been a lot of activity over the last kind of 4 months informing the findings. I think our headline, and I don't say this lightly, I should say, as Samantha may have said, I've got a background in housing and homelessness. I worked at Crisis for nearly 5 years before joining PPL. And my second hat is that I'm the independent chair of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Paul's Homelessness Delivery Board. So I am working with a lot of local areas across the country on various homelessness-related initiatives and challenges. And it's clear in Cambridge City that there is a really strong foundation in place to respond to homelessness, and we found that consistently throughout the review, particularly around partnership work, and particularly around the voluntary and community sector, particularly around multi-agency work, and that point that came up from the lived experience research around the value of trusted relationships and specialist services. I think, as probably won't surprise you though, these strengths are under increasing strain. I think certainly from a homelessness perspective, we're in the perfect storm at the moment, and there's increasing pressures on our kind of social housing, move on, temporary accommodation, access to the private rented sector, and that's obviously causing pressures throughout the system. One of the other things that we're seeing from the data and engagement with stakeholders is that kind of increasing complexity of need as well of the people approaching services for help. And again, that's something that's replicated across the country. I think one of our findings is that the system is very good at responding at that crisis point, but perhaps less consistent, and you'll see this in our recommendations around prevention and earlier intervention, much earlier in those journeys before it reaches crisis point. Some of the key pressure points, although you'll have seen from the mapping, there are well-established kind of arrangements and protocols at some of those what we kind of call risky transition points around discharge from hospital, institutions, people leaving local authority care. I still think there are some pressure points, and some of our recommendations reflect that. Again, a common finding from a lot of areas is around supported housing and housing-related support, particularly for those with kind of higher support needs. And the other thing we found around, I guess, an inconsistent access to health services. So the Cambridge Access Surgery was came up time and time again as a real positive, but there was a view that their capacity is limited, and therefore alternative primary care routes for people experiencing homelessness might be quite limited in terms of access. And what we also found, again, which is common in these reviews, is people that are kind of hidden or underrepresented in rough sleeping data. Some of the statutory homelessness data we have can kind of fall through the cracks a bit as well in some of our service responses. So as I said, our recommendations are very much strength-based, building on the strong foundations that already exist within the city, which I'll touch on shortly. But I think our clear principle, as we look to the next phase around strategy development and the delivery plan, is around that start less and finish more. So I think what we often see in these processes is you generate a long action plan and a long list of things to do, and just we're really one of our key recommendations is to really prioritize that. Brilliant. Next slide. I think something's loading on your screen. There we go. Sorry, I appreciate it. I'm not sure how much time I have, so I might pick up the pace a little bit. Samantha, is it all right if we just go back to the data slide?
Yes, please. We've got lots of people wanting to ask questions, so I'd like to
Right.
get as much time as possible.
Okay, well, I think everyone's probably had a look at the papers and stuff. So yeah, I'll rattle through just the last few, and then very happy to answer questions. This one just summarises some of the quantitative data analysis, those key points are raised around demand, what's driving it, different outcomes depending on the service user groups we're talking about. Next slide, please, Samantha. Again, this just reiterates some of the key messages from the broader system engagement that we did. A particular point I haven't mentioned was around the local workforce, particularly in the voluntary community sector, and some of the challenges around recruitment and retention there. But you may have seen in the national plan there is a kind of specific commitments around workforce and an investment fund for that. Next slide, please, Samantha. Just reiterating what I said around how we framed the recommendations from the review, prevention being a central principle, and obviously that point that recognising the context of LGR and how we have intentionally framed our recommendations within that. Next slide, please, Samantha. This just summarises the recommendations. I know you've kind of got access to them, and we expand on them in a bit more detail. We look at them through different lenses in terms of who we think should have ownership of those recommendations. As you'll see, it's intentionally not all a list of council things, but this is a whole system issue. And then just lastly, the last two slides, which it would have been nice to have more time in, but I intentionally wanted to end on this, where with the lived experience research that we did, there's a couple of specific case studies I've included in the last two slides, which were positive stories about people's experiences, and also I think just articulates a number of the points that we've talked about previously, particularly that one around timely support, particularly the one around relationships, networks, and sustainment, and the importance of a stable home. So there's one here. These are pseudonymized case studies, but Aidan and Claire I thought were quite powerful examples as well that just bring it to life a bit, as well as the numbers and the slides. So happy to share the slides after, and I'll stop there. Hopefully answer some of your questions.
Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate that. Right, so I'll open it out to questions. Councillor Gardner-Smith.
Great, thanks very much. I'll try and be brief because I know that there's lots of questions people want to ask. So thanks. I mean, again, to reiterate, the report was really useful, loads of data in there, I think going to be really helpful for the council in developing the strategy. Also just to commend the council and officers, you know, for the progress and the work that's been done. Clearly that's reflected in the sort of positive views of, you know, the strong foundations of the council's work on homelessness. So really good. So I've got a couple of sort of more questions on some of the data, and then a kind of bigger picture question. So on you know there's been an increase in demand, and I just would like sort of to clarify where this is coming from. So it looks like from your data that it's coming largely from eviction from supported housing and also the private rental sector is driving that to more demand, but it would be useful to understand more about that and why we're seeing that increase in demand in Cambridge. I'm concerned about what you say about the increase in domestic violence referrals. That's really quite significant. It stands out from the data. I'm interested to know, is that partly driven by better reporting, by the council getting better at identifying domestic violence cases earlier, or is this, you know, what is going on here? What do we think is going on here when it comes to an increase in domestic DV referrals? Because that's quite concerning. And then when you couple that with, I think, one of the conclusions, which is that there are limited options for women when it comes to supported accommodation, that is quite concerning, and I think needs to be a real focus in the strategy going forward. If there's an increase in women fleeing domestic violence, where, you know, majority women fleeing domestic violence, where, you know, how are we supporting them going forward? And then finally, on the point about, you know, the sort of move to earlier prevention-based models, which seems like absolutely the right area to focus the strategy, you know, sort of part of our work going forwards. I suppose I'd just like to understand a bit more about what the council can do there. There's a reference in recommendations to piloting predictive analytics, you know, use of AI, I presume, to identify risk, you know, cases that are at risk earlier on and to intervene earlier. It's not clear to me beyond that what that prevention work looks like, and the prevention activities that are listed that we do currently does feel like it's just, you know, is crisis work. It's not that early prevention that's needed. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So I think to start the point around domestic abuse approaches and demand, I think we specifically note that kind of increased from 2021, which I don't think is a coincidence when the Domestic Abuse Act came in 2021. So that is something seen in a lot of areas that we work in, that has specifically intentionally led to an increase in approaches. It's now kind of priority need blind, depending on which local authority you approach with. So I think that's kind of primarily the driver of that trend, and one that we see kind of replicated in other local areas. But I definitely agree with your point around local provision and responding to that need. So what obviously as part of the Domestic Abuse Act, everyone has to do a safe accommodation needs assessment as part of that, and almost everywhere, recognises the acute shortages. Another familiar theme that we found, and a lot of areas, I think, including Cambridge, has done a women's rough sleeping census, specifically recognising that women are underreported in kind of some of the more traditional data collection methods. So I would kind of agree that needs to be, a key priority within the strategy. Also, concur with your point around private rented sector and supported housing evictions, as some of the key drivers of demand. The private rented sector one, again, seen elsewhere, with a view that's landlords responding in advance of the Renters' Rights Act coming in May. So we're seeing that in a lot of areas. It's certainly the kind of the last year, and knowing that act is on the horizon. There's even been kind of specific, maybe not official, but like guidance from landlord associations saying if you've got those risky tenants, now's the time to get them out before the Renters' Rights Act comes in. And I think on the point around prevention, we have kind of expanded on this a bit more since the draft report. I think for me, there's two forms of early intervention. There's basing yourself in different locations so you can pick people up earlier. So that might be some of those transition points we talked about. It might be community locations. It might be food banks. It might be those broader multi-agency hubs where you're not ostensibly there to talk about a housing issue, but you can pick it up when it kind of arises. The other thing is that in the national plan, there is now a commitment for a duty to collaborate, which is asking probably those statutory organisations that currently have a duty to refer someone that might be at risk of homelessness to actually do a bit more than just referring them. But then it does include that kind of proactive case finding thing. So not just basing ourselves where we can interact with people a bit earlier that might be at risk, but using the data that we do have to flag people at risk, which is where, as you say, where that kind of predictive analytics point comes in. There is a national test and learn program in 4 local authorities specifically looking at the use of predictive data to prevent homelessness, which is hopefully there to kind of give lessons for everyone else. But a lot of local authorities have been kind of piloting various different things in that area. So hopefully that answers your question. But it's a combination of what I would kind of call proactive case finding, people that are potentially at risk, that might, not necessarily know it yet, but we're trying to catch them early. And then also various kind of mechanisms to identify and get people in earlier before they reach crisis.
Okay, thank you. Anyone got any further questions? I've got Councillor Bick. I'll leave Councillor Houck, since you remember the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this very detailed report. I mean, I am just noticed, it does rely, or it does draw on lived experience, but I don't think it mentions sort of wider public engagement. I mean, either to hear from views from residents or community groups, views on homelessness, possible suggestions on what they could do in their communities, but maybe also the other way around, sort of information campaign, telling residents what they can do if they either think somebody is homeless or at risk of homelessness, or how can they be part of it, how can they help. So is there any scope for that in the future, and is this something this committee could also pursue? Thank you.
Yes, so my understanding would certainly be the strategy development phase would include some broader, public consultation and engagement. So whilst there has been lived experience research, as you said, as part of this review, and this is almost the evidence base, my expectation would be that strategy development, the next phase, you can not just do your formal public kind of 6-week consultation and things like that, but can do a much wider range of engagement with local residents and community groups and things like that as well. So I definitely, still think that's part of co-developing a strategy that everyone can kind of see their own role in. And I think some of the examples you gave there are really good.
Thank you. Councillor Bick.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for permitting me to speak as a ward councillor. You'll understand why I did that as I speak. And I have several things to say if I could. I too think it's a really excellent report. Why it was ever considered deserving to be confidential, I cannot imagine, especially in the light of the question that has just been asked. This is, of course, a matter of huge public concern, and the public should be dignified by being part of our conversation about it. I think it's a good report because it's focusing on what's going on as a system, and I think it's really important to sort of understand it and see it like that, and a lot of people don't. And I think it's important also because it reflects the reality of the situation, that although homelessness is about the homes, it's not only that, it's also a need to have people capable of sustaining tenancies and homes, and that is part of the problem that we face in the snapshot that we've got today. And anything I'm going to say is not trying to diminish the fact that, of course, prevention is always the first priority, but we also still have, the situation that we have today. Now, eight years ago, as a ward councillor, I co-authored a report on rough sleeping in Cambridge. I understand that is a subset of the whole of what we're talking about here, and I did that as a ward councillor representing the city centre particularly because of the impact of rough sleeping in my ward. We made a series of recommendations. It was a very different sort of report from the quality that you're discussing today. But we did talk to many of those same agencies, and we did, I think, come up with some useful recommendations. And many of these were at least nominally later adopted by the council in the strategy that has been going on for the time in between. And I think that obviously was good. And I think it's also good that actually some of those same recommendations are reflected in the report that is in front of us now, which shows that they were relevant, but they're still relevant. And that was really what kind of provoked me to come along and say something about this at the committee, that there are some durable things here, even if demand may have changed. But there were three areas that I wanted to pull out, where I'm not sure that we've kind of completely settled on where we need to be in respect of the strategy. 8 years ago, we advocated a Cambridge Charter. And we did that because we felt there was a need to galvanise this sort of very rich and large ecosystem that I think is well noted in the report. We needed to galvanise it so that we were sure that it acted in a complementary way. And also because we felt there was a need through something like a charter to have something which would explain to the public what the exercise was that we were embarked on. And I think it's a bit disappointing that reading between the lines here, that this still hasn't kind of quite settled with the buy-in of everyone. And I think that this is something that should from the beginning have been led by the council itself. It was certainly what we recommended. It was obvious to us, and why we didn't go that route, I really don't know, and it may be something that needs to be revisited now. Just to say something more about this ecosystem. So the size of the ecosystem is very large, and that certainly can be a strength, and I think it is a strength. But there is also the risk that it can be a weakness if it becomes too fragmented, and it's not all pulling in the same direction. Now, I'm not sure that I'm going to make any assertions about that, but I do think that as this goes forward to a new strategy, that we do need to satisfy ourselves that all of the incentives within this ecosystem are all pulling in the same direction. And I think that there is, if you look at it this way, and often people say this, and I'm not sure whether the evidence proves it, but we should check, that we need to make sure that the emphasis is on moving people forward in a progressive way in the pathways towards the ability to hold sustainable tenancies. That the emphasis is on that, not on keeping particular facilities or institutions occupied. And there is a huge difference, and they can work against each other in terms of moving people through pathways, which really, really must be our priority. And that really does depend on leadership, and I think that's why the City Council needs to be really in the driving seat here. Another of our recommendations was for a comprehensive assessment of the types, mix and overall quantity of supported accommodation needed in Cambridge. And that was something that was said 8 years ago, but I see, reading this report, that the same requirement is really suggested again today, that we probably need a better way of making that assessment. And I just point to the fact that one of the corollaries in this report is that we're told that, that we have a shortage of high needs or complex needs supported accommodation or hostels. In my ward, I'm just watching while the highest need hostel that was there is converted into luxury flats, because the council acquiesced in a situation where there was apparently quite enough supported, high needs supported housing, and don't worry about that because there are plenty of other places for people to go. Well, I'm reading this report. I'm not so sure that our method of making these assessments and those judgments, it doesn't really look like it was that brilliant, because I'm not talking about 8 years ago there, I'm talking about 3 or 4 years ago. And finally, I wanted to pick out Housing First, which we did urge the council to engage with and hadn't done until this recent strategy. And the council did, and I think it's really good that it has. But I just feel that what Housing First is and why it's a good idea has got a bit lost in translation. Cambridge has adopted a very unusual interpretation of what Housing First is. In part of what the City Council is doing, it's become a very paternalistic, very institutionalised form of Housing First, which may have a place in the system, but it really isn't looking much like Housing First. And I think there was been a little bit too much emphasis on the bricks and mortar pieces of this, rather than the sort of the assistance that needs to be provided, the software that goes with this. And I think that it would be really useful if what we mean by Housing First and how we go about it is really looked at a little bit more deeply now. In other parts of the country, it's reliant much more on the private rented sector, and I absolutely understand the difficulties of actually replicating that in the city of Cambridge. But I do think there is at least a worthwhile investigation about using the private rented sector throughout the reference area for the determination of housing allowance, which is much bigger than the city in this area, and would enable, for example, what I learned 8 years ago, people in Housing First in Camden arrived in Housing First private rented sector accommodation in Bromley. Now, I'm not sure we're using our geography in quite the way, and I know there's pluses and minuses and we should look at them, but I do think there's more to be done. And the other thing is Housing First, we really aren't doing very much of it, and I think there is, if we can get the model right. That's all I wanted to say, but I just think there's some great stuff here, but we just really need to rake hard into the things that we thought were already happening and perhaps aren't actually brilliant yet.
Thanks, Tim. I've just got a few that was really helpful. Just a few quick responses. I mean, totally agree with your point around the move on. I mean, at Crisis, we framed it as managing homelessness versus ending it. And I think too often we do the former rather than the latter. I think to your point around a proper supported housing needs assessment, that is now a requirement for every local housing authority by March 27. With the Regulatory Oversight Act to do a supported housing needs assessment and supported housing strategy. Obviously, we touched on it in this review, but it had a broader scope. We hosted a webinar with 20 local authorities and 60 participants this morning, specifically discussing supported housing needs assessments and also the role of housing-led and housing-first responses in that. Because I think in my view, the national plan didn't go far enough as much as we were hoping. It name checks housing first, but doesn't really go far enough. One of the things that we also kind of advocate for as well is there's no reason those 7 housing first principles should only apply to housing first services and people experiencing multiple disadvantage within housing first services. Those 7 principles should apply to your whole system. And we kind of often advocate that those should be our definition of quality. They're how we collectively want to work and address homelessness. So I think that's something potentially to be explored, in the strategy development phase as well.
Okay, thank you. I've got no one on the list, so I'm going to ask a question. You make a large number of recommendations, and they all sound great. There's sort of recommendations around the sort of process, I would say. So, the requirement to actually talk to the people, the co-production, the duty to collaborate with other people, the need to commission legal advice, having a strategic forum of some kind, revised private rented sector strategy, which Councillor Bick's just been talking about, multidisciplinary teams, the team around the person, the local connection rules, debt resolution. I mean, I could go on and on. They all sound great. Can you maybe talk about which are the sort of priorities, or which, maybe Samantha can comment as well about how easy is that to implement? Some of them sound, well, they all sound very sensible things, but I mean, there's a reason where there could be several reasons why we're not doing them. Maybe we just haven't thought about it, but maybe they're really difficult to do. So I'd like your view, perhaps, on how you see us actually implementing these recommendations.
Yeah, sure. So I think what we obviously kind of, with these reviews, it is the evidence base, and it does generate this kind of long list, as you say. What we kind of thought is it's almost the next phase, the strategy development phase, where you have some of the more kind of prioritization discussion sequencing, how are we actually going to deliver this. We have started to do that probably in a bit more detail than was in the draft report. So this will be in the final report, where we've done a bit of our view on prioritization. And we've looked at those recommendations from different lenses, like I said. So is this a predominantly kind of council-owned thing? Is this more of a system change? Is this a quick win? Like, could it be done in 3 months? Is it more of a exploratory test and learn thing where we're not really sure and we just need to start learning by doing? Is it one where actually we need a proper business case, or there needs to be a commissioning exercise or something like that? So we have unpicked them in a bit more detail, explored them in some kind of different lenses, given an early view on prioritization, just as you say, to kind of make it a bit more digestible and manageable.
Okay.
But our view is we were kind of straying into the strategy development delivery plan next phase, if you see what I mean, where we can kind of do that, or you, if it doesn't involve PPL in a lot more detail.
Okay, thank you. I'd like Samantha's view, please.
Yes, so we will obviously take that as part of the strategy development. That will be some of the work that we do, is, I think, understanding both what is achievable
in the window we have. So one of the things that we are looking to do, normally you would develop a 5-year strategy, but with LGR on the horizon for us, what we've actually done is looked at South Cams strategy, because we know every model has us with South Cams. Their strategy ends in 2028. They've already, theirs is already existing. It makes sense to align so that actually we, as we go into LGR at that point, a strategy for the new organisation can be developed. So that's one of the things that we need to look at, what is actually a bit achievable in that period. We do want to really push where we can that early prevention. So certainly as a council, that is one of our main priorities, not just for homelessness, across the piece, is where can we push that prevention sort of further upstream and actually get in before it gets to crisis point. So I think we will definitely be looking to prioritise those actions across the system. But also, as Joe has said, where there's quick wins, I think, it's sensible to look at those and actually get some stuff done. I think that's always helpful in these types of strategies. And I think, for me as well, I think one of the things that came out of the review is actually that sort of revolving door of homelessness. And I think, what can we actually do? We perhaps haven't been able to prevent homelessness at this point, but actually what can we do going forward so that stops there and people can look to sustain their accommodation so that we don't keep having people coming back through. So I know, that's certainly something, an area that we want to develop some actions around.
Thank you. Yeah, because I really like the way you separated out, or the report separates things out into different pathways, because then you kind of know how to catch or prevent those particular different pathways early. The prevention, I think, is very much a key thing. I'd like to understand exactly what your sort of AI or analytics will do, and what data you're going to be using for that. Is that housing rented data, or what exactly is that?
So we do already have access to a tool called the Low Income Family Tracker, or LIFT software. So what that does is that combines our housing benefits and council tax data with data with our own city council rent arrears data as well is in there. So that can give us some, that sort of allows us to track those low-income families. So if you take council tax as an example, if people are on council tax support, we will have had the evidence as to why, so we'll have an element of their benefits data as part of that, so we'll understand perhaps what they are claiming, what they're not claiming as a result of that. So we do have access to that, and we are looking at expanding our use of that and joining up with South Cams, who already have resource as well as the software to look at campaigns. So we're looking at sharing that resource, and so that's kind of an early version of it. I'll be honest, we've obviously got the information in the review around some of these new sort of AIs. The honest answer is I don't know what data they're looking at. That's something, we need to explore as part of the strategy work. They're already test and learn. So, we can learn from others and whether that is useful, whether that is something that we want to take forward. But until we explore that properly, I wouldn't know what data they're using, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. I believe Sam Schaaf has also got his hand up. Sam?
Sorry, slowly materialising. Thank you, Chair. And sorry, my hand came up just before this conversation on AI, so I can't elaborate much more on that. It was more a question you asked about prioritisation from our perspective, and I think one thing that stood out and is relevant to our thinking here is, because the review has predominantly looked at the system, some of these big recommendations, particularly on certain pathways, do require system approaches, particularly engagement with health, probation, and the county council, who are a predominant funder of and the funder of supported housing. So there are some complexities that we need to consider about how we balance the things that will have the biggest impact, particularly in some of these pathways that have been highlighted by Joe and the team, and the complexity of addressing those pathways because of the alignment of funding and prioritization with other organizations. And Simon may want to reflect himself on this, but it's not like the team haven't already identified some of these through joint work that we currently have with probation and previous historic work that we've done with Adam Brooks around recognizing these pathways and trying to address them already. So that there's learning that we need to take about how we better get those right, given Councillor Bick, you've identified that is, some of these things are intractable things that we've been trying to deliver for some time. So I just wanted to reflect that this isn't all on how we think about prioritization is going to require some wider partner engagement to figure out how and what we do.
Yeah, I don't think any of this is easy. Yeah. Councillor Griffin.
Thank you. And thank you for the really interesting report. And concerning some of the recommendations, especially those concerned with a more integrated approach or to having a better communication between different groups, I think that we all hope that the unitary authority will solve some of those problems. At least we hope that it will. And maybe with that in mind, over the next few years, we should be looking at reports like this, recommendations, and making sure that as we merge these local authorities into a unitary, that we actually do the right thing in terms of making information flow and things like that much easier. That's sort of a comment, sort of a question, I guess.
Sam?
Yes, absolutely, and definitely housing is sort of one of the that housing and communities is one of the key areas that is being looked at as part of LGR, as well as sort of some of the other adult services. But yes, I think that's where unitaries can really come into their own if you get that real alignment with sort of adult supported services, etc., and housing, because we know that they go hand in glove.
Thank you. Councillor Divkovic.
Thank you. There are a lot of things. There are a lot of good recommendations here, and this report is very detailed. There's a lot of terminology there as well. There's also a lot of things that we can't necessarily control. With a lot of factors that we're facing with rising rental costs and obviously the stagnation of wages. And so there's only so much, and the increasing demand of housing with the population increases in the city. So there's only so much that the City Council can really do to manage this, especially with the rate in which we're building new houses in Cambridge. But it'll be interesting to see, because obviously a large number of the people that are homeless in the statistics are those who are private renters. So it'll be interesting to see how the new Renters' Rights Act is going to influence that, or the abolishment of no-fault evictions. It'll be interested to see how the statistics will change as a result of that, and whether that actually helps a little bit in this area. I'm interested to hear the officer's opinion about the recommendation for putting those who have obviously experienced domestic abuse and putting them under Plan A. Is it Plan A or Category Grade A on HomeLink? Whether you whether the council has considered that already, and what are the potential issues with that?
If it's okay, Simon, Simon's got his hand up, so hopefully he can advise on that, because he's much closer to Homelink than I am.
Yeah, thank you. So I think Joe did touch on this as part of his presentation. So the first thing to say is that women who are homeless as a result of domestic violence have a priority need, and that means we have a duty to provide them with accommodation, albeit temporary accommodation. But if they're in priority need, they're owed what we call the main homelessness duty. And under our lettings policy, that means they will automatically be given a Band A, which, as you will know, is the highest priority available as part of the Homelink scheme. So in other words, any woman who is fleeing domestic violence, it will almost certainly get Band A.
Okay. Any further questions from anyone? I'd like to ask Joe a question. Joe, what do you think is the one thing, what would you put as your top priority for us to do? What do you think is will have the biggest effect?
Good question. Can I be cheeky and say two? I do. Obviously, we've talked about prevention a lot, but I do think that there is evidence out there of authorities using more kind of predictive approaches that have quite impressive and tangible outcomes. So whether you use predictive or not, but I think being more targeted and coordinated around prevention, particularly around, we mentioned the private rented sector, for example. And then my second one would be around that move on, accessing settled accommodation. So we specifically had a recommendation around general needs social housing for people experiencing homelessness. And that there is, I think, from our engagement, there is more that we could do collaboratively with social housing providers around kind of clear commitments, monitoring of performance around lettings to people moving on and out of homelessness. And I think that would be my second one, because that's kind of resources that we've already got that we're potentially underutilizing from a homelessness, ending people's homelessness perspective. And there are lots of good examples from other areas around particularly accessing social housing. So those would be my kind of top two.
Interesting, thank you. Does anyone have anything else want to comment? Councillor Todd Jones.
Yeah, can I just thank everyone for their comments, and been taking copious notes during the course of the debate. Also thank Joe and PPL for, as everyone has said, a really excellent report, a massive amount of data in there. So actually there'll be quite a lot of work in terms of drilling down about what this means in terms of the strategy going forward. I mean, I've been able to visit a number, but not all yet, of our key providers in the city, and we're kind of getting the same consistent message that's actually reflected in the report, which is about the increasing demand, but particularly for complex and multiple needs, and the provision in order to address those needs in particular, I think, has been really quite evident. The other thing I think I'd like to say is, kind of in response to Councillor Bick, is undoubtedly it's always been the case, I think, that bricks and mortar are not enough, and its support packages are absolutely critical to sustaining tenancies or sustaining people in accommodation, and that has clearly got to be a focus of what we do as a council going forward. But just want to thank everyone very much for their comments, and look forward to the next stage in this process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think it's an excellent report, and thanks very much, Joe, for must have been masses of work. Looking at all the data is quite sort of abstract in a way. But last Tuesday we went and visited Overstream House and Winter Comfort, for example, and met with the people that actually run one of the rough sleeping providers, the essential welfare providers, James Holden and Danielle Lamb. And it really makes meeting the people in there, the homeless people in there, and actually talking with these providers really brings it to life and actually completely transforms how you see this endemic problem of homelessness. And for example, one of the things that James told us was that there's 800 people from all the different groups just in Winter Comfort itself, which is quite a small building. That's everybody. Some people only visit once a year. Other people come several times a week. Of those 800, 80 to 100 are women who have suffered from domestic violence, and they have a special group on Tuesdays that actually, with Danielle Lamb, to actually help with that and to actually provide them with secure refuge housing nearby. There's all sorts of things that actually visiting and making the connections between somewhere like Winter Comfort and Simon Penn and Olivia in the City Council, it all starts to make sense when you actually see it in real life. Obviously, there's things that the central government can do, like right to buy and actually stopping one of the main causes of homelessness over the last 40 years, and all sorts of things. Sam Carling, who was my colleague in West Chesterton with the Renters' Right Act, there's all sorts of things that we're doing. Lewis Herbert, the ex-leader of the council, City Council, who has been travelling around the country looking at pods for as one of the short-term solutions for homelessness. So we're very, very mindful of this, and Mike Todd-Jones, who's the homelessness cabinet member. So we're very mindful of this, and we're very interested in trying to find long-term solutions. One of the things that was interesting that I thought from visiting Winter Comfort, I thought it was just a sort of hearsay, but Cambridge is actually relatively very, very good for a sympathetic and tolerant city that actually is good for people finding solutions for people from homelessness. And some of the cities, for example, Brighton, do actually have one-way tickets, and I thought that was just hearsay, to come to Cambridge because it is actually a relatively good place to be if you're homeless. That actually increases the number of homeless people, but it actually disguises a nationwide problem. But actually, we are working very hard on this, and we are keenly interested in improving what we already have. So thanks very much, Joe, for everything you've done in giving statistical and sort of understanding the problem and digging down into what the causes are and what the solutions might be. Thank you.
Okay, right, so I'm hearing the fact that there's great concern about the rise in domestic violence. We are very much in favour of earlier prevention and the use of analytics and the proactive looking for cases or people who are in danger of homelessness, looking for them early on. I think that was that number one action from Joe. And also the emphasis on moving people on, working with social housing providers and just emphasising getting people into a stable accommodation situation. There is a shortage of high needs accommodation and we need to look at ways of addressing that. Is there anything else that people would like me to add to the recommendation to Cabinet? Any other advice for officers? No? Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone involved. I think there's been a lot of very hard work and we look forward to the emerging strategy itself. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming, particularly the Cabinet members and the other people who have joined us, like board members. And that concludes this meeting. Thank you very much all.